right. Good morning, everyone. This is Suzanne Plumley, and I am your torchbearer for the Aspie Bridge with all the wonderful people out on YouTube, such as Paul Micallef in Australia, and Sam in Europe, and Sandra Hendricks in the UK, talking about what autism is. We don't need another person to tell you what autism is, but someone who can help you understand that it's not enough to know about what autism is. It's now time for us to help the women and the men who have been late diagnosed to go over this bridge back into society and become very gifted members of society, treated equally and with respect. And today I have a wonderful guest on with me, Wendy Whitcomb Marsh, and she's done a lot of her own studies in helping women and men go over this bridge and start to become very strong members of society. Now, I like to bring out a parable that I like to use, which is very important to me. And that parable is you can teach us to fish and we'll fish for a lifetime, or you can fish for us and we'll work for one day. And why I like to say that is it goes along with micromanaging. Everyone has an opinion of what we can do and what we can't do. Everyone has an opinion of what we should do and what we shouldn't do. For some reason, as soon as you get a diagnosis, people automatically assume that you're disabled. You can't make a decision. You can't do anything for yourself. And I've been over this bridge enough times to tell you that I can do these things. And a lot of people will even say to me, why do you label yourself? I'm like, it's not a label. I explain that I am autistic, but I'm able to do so much. And please allow me to do what I can before you take over. Or ask me if I need help before you take over. Because no Aspie woman or man wants you to come in and do the little things that they can do themselves. So let me take this time now to introduce a great expert in this level. And let me just start off by saying, let's go to Shakespeare for a moment. To be independent or not to be independent, that is the question. And Wendy, where can you go from there?
I love that quote so much, and also your parable about teaching them to fish. And I think I've another step to that. You know, if you give them a fish, that's one meal. Teach them to fish, they can keep fishing. But now that I'm my age, I have a practice where I hire a lot of autistic therapists and counselors to work with other people. They're not all autistic, but most of them are. And it kind of feels like if you open a fishing school, then instead of teaching one person to fish, then that person can teach many, many people to fish for themselves. So we're trying to expand. And I know you are all about that and all about that bridge to independence. And the one, I'm not here just to sell books, but I do have a book about independent living while autistic, and it looks at many of the pieces to autism. I should say, jumping around here, I'm not autistic. I've been called quirky and I was shy as a child, but that is not the same as being autistic. And I would never say, oh, we're all a little autistic, aren't we? Because that would be minimizing the very real challenges that even very independent women who can do many, many things for themselves. But I know some who, yes, they can have a job, a husband, a career, children, but maybe they can't talk on the phone. You know, that's okay. We have email. Email exists. They don't want somebody to come in and take over their parenting, but if they could just not talk on the phone, life would be better. So I think it's really important that we, as you were saying, honor the independent autistic people for what they can do and amplify their voices. And here I am being non-autistic talking with you today.
Actually, that's perfect. That's exactly because it's so important that we have wonderful people as yourself who are willing to come back to this side of the bridge. where I am standing to help women. The last week I had two women that were not autistic either.
Uh-huh.
Excuse me. And what I find is that when I can introduce women to wonderful members of society who are not autistic, but very willing to help the autistic demographic, they feel more comfortable having a face to go along with my
Yeah.
just saying there are people out there. And until you see a face, you don't feel comfortable. Now, would
Well,
you mind if I ask you a few questions?
I'm happy for you to ask me anything.
Okay. So, one of the things about becoming independent is I like to ask the women, are you ready emotionally, physically, and financially? And when I say that is, and I've been going through this with myself in a situation on my own, it's not enough to just say for an Aspie woman to say, okay, I'm going to move into a house and it's going to have 5 bedrooms and it's going to do this and that. I mean, I would say that might not be the best first step for you. You really need to make sure that you have a couple of things lined up before you get all excited. Yes, I congratulate the fact that you think you're able to do that. That's a first step. But are you emotionally ready? Can you answer the door if someone comes to the door? Are you able to go out to your mailbox without being afraid? Are you able to do a go to the bank and cash a check? Are you able to handle some of these things that might require that you have someone there to help? Like, for instance, what if you couldn't drive? Would you know that you should get your groceries delivered? These are all different questions. Ooh, let me
These,
just do two more, and then I'll have ask for your response, Wendy.
thanks.
What kind of house size can you manage? Now, for me, someone said, "Well, wouldn't you want a 4 bedroom, five bath house?" I'm like, "No, actually, I love a tiny house. For me personally, I don't want a lot to manage, and if I do choose to travel, I don't want to have to wonder who's going to mow my lawn and clean off my roof." The third one is, are you a city person who can handle crowds under your windows as long as you don't have to drive anywhere, or a country person where you have a vehicle you can drive and get to work because you hate the crowds and the noisy nights? What would you like to do on some of those? How can you lend your view on some of those questions, Wendy?
Those are such wonderful questions and important for everyone to ask. Now, although I'm not autistic, my late husband was autistic, and two of our three children, now grown, were all late diagnosed as autistic, which and of course each one is different. Plus, all the people that I've hired are different, and all the people that we work with in our practice, they're all different, just like any group of people. One young woman I know had been living with family and loved their family, but really craved solitude. And she got herself on a list for a kind of a disability low income housing project, one of those things. And it took years, but now she's in a little cottage. It's like a quad with other people in a little community that is almost all like people in their 80s, which is perfect for her. She is not there to socialize. And she knows how to get groceries delivered. She doesn't like to talk on the phone. She does not drive. And sometimes it is hard for her to walk to the mailbox in case she runs into people. But she gets to see her family regularly when she is ready to be with other people. And I know someone else who likes their privacy but does not want to live alone. They would like to be able to go to their room and not have to share a bathroom, but then to know that there was somebody else in the house, somebody else, another heart beating, another breath breathing, just not right in their space all the time, but to come out and share a meal and watch TV together. For that one, that is their ideal situation. And I know someone else who is looking for a 2 bedroom, 2 bath for the purpose of someday bringing in maybe a housemaid. that they wouldn't have to share a bathroom. Um, but others really want the tiny house experience because it is so cozy. They know where everything is. The ingenious little ways that tiny houses have to slide. This goes under here. This comes down from there to be able to fit everything you need into a cozy space. I know many people really appreciate the mechanics and the engineering that go into a tiny house. It's fascinating. Yeah, that's you too, isn't it? So there are so many things to think of, as you mentioned, and a financial situation, certainly, to look at the big picture. What income do you have? And how much, it costs sometimes more to have food delivered. But that cost might be worth it if that means you don't have to go into a store. I tell you, I'm not autistic, but I do parking lot pickup for groceries or sometimes get it delivered ever since the pandemic. It's like that was a good idea that came out of a terrible situation, but that's something that's available for everyone, even people on SNAP, the food stamps. There are places that will deliver your food, and it's paid for by SNAP. So society is more and more going towards supporting people with disabilities or disabled people rather than, and I know we're not there yet. We're not there yet, and there are a lot of challenges that people are facing, but we're on the way. Maya Angelou said, "Do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better." And I hope that's where we're going as a society. I hope we are learning to know better so that we can do better for all of us.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's not limited to the Aspies, but I have to tell you, I tend to be a problem solver. And so when I can say, well, would really be great if we could put this into place. And sometimes I can orchestrate helping that get going. Sometimes I have to just put it into the right ear to get them to get going. But when you talk about the grocery shopping, oh man, the idea of pushing a cart around a crowded store is not my idea of fun. Now, my housemate loves to push the cart. I'm like, go for it. And it's about knowing who you're getting in with. You really need, if you're going to bring someone in to help you, make sure you do jive. Make sure you go over some of the things that I forgot to go over.
There's so many little things that you might not realize until you're in the situation. But then what you've learned, you'll be able to share with others so that they can avoid the same thing. I think that's part of, we all make mistakes, and when we use them to help, that's what you're all about, helping other people. I love that about you.
That's where I am, because there is an expression that we use in my organization, and it is called, the content of my life is the curriculum of my evolution. And what that means is that everything that I've gone through and had my successes and my failures, I can then take all of those lessons and help other Aspie women who have been starting to experience this. And so be the torchbearer, as I say. I call myself the torchbearer because I am autistic. I have walked the journey, and now I can tell them true advice. And yeah, that might not work so as well as you think. That might be a great on paper kind of thing, but not necessarily in real life. One of the funny things is that we're not the best house cleaners. We are organizers, but we're not the best house cleaners. And then if you get a germaphobe in your house, it doesn't always match up. But I mean, that was one of the lessons I learned. Ask someone if they're germaphobe before you invite them into your Aspie house. Because
So
I get
many
so
things.
excited with so many other activities that, yeah, it's healthy enough, but it's not the most. But anyway, let's keep going on from
Okay.
there. One of the other things that I think an Aspie needs to consider in this comes in the physical realm is first floor or top floor. Because for me, having a dog, carrying a dog and groceries and going up the stairs every time I wanted to go somewhere seemed like too much trouble to me. But at the opposite extreme, if someone doesn't like bugs and they're on the first floor, maybe the top floor is better. I mean, these are just all the questions you don't think about until you get like, what do I prefer? The next one would be creating coping mechanisms that allow you to thrive in society, such as I said, the shopping we were talking about, banking, social activity. Can you go up to a drive-through? But if you're not driving, that might be more challenging. But then you have to think about the banking. So these are some of the different day-to-day activities that we need to think the next step to. We need to think, I don't have a car, but I don't like the inside of a bank.
And
That might be an interesting way to go about doing that. Wendy, what are your thoughts?
I have discovered uh, mobile phone check deposits that you can take a picture of your check and both sides and just type in on your phone, and then it deposits the check for you. You don't have to go to the bank. So, automatic bill pay. That is so important for, especially for people who might also have some ADD and might forget something like, they have every intention to pay all their bills on time. Once you put in auto pay on your bills, you don't have to worry about paying the bills.
I have my
If you
rent
do,
set up that way. That's
yes,
wonderful.
it's wonderful. If you do drive and you want to go through like a fast food place or something, but you don't necessarily want to interact, you can upload their app and do all your ordering on the app. So then it goes right to their computer so they know what to fix for you. And then you can pay with your credit card on the app if you have a credit card. That way, you're not talking to them if you don't want to talk to strangers. You're not handing them your money or your credit card if you don't really want to, you know, especially the germaphobes, as you mentioned. They might not want somebody putting their fingers on their card. So
Exactly.
more and more, we're finding things that we can do online. And I think a cell phone is less a luxury that it used to be and more a gateway. Many autistic people that I know and love have a lot of socialization online. They have very dear friends that might live in France or somewhere else. You have to kind of work out the timelines as far as the time zones for when you can actually talk, but you can at least email, and then they'll read it and when they wake up. And I think it's important for people who are not autistic to realize those are real friends. The parents should be thinking, oh, my child has no real friends. They're in their computer all the time. Well, they might be talking to their real friends, even though they're not in the room.
Right.
We need to respect that.
We do.
Yeah. Another thing about parents who worry about their kids, teenage and young adult people being in the room all the time or playing games. Video games, and I know a lot of parents think that they're terrible, but for many autistic people that I know, that is a de-stress relaxation thing. And if they're taking college classes or they have a job or they're in some kind of a program all day and then they come home, they need to relax and de-stress, and computer games can be very useful for that very thing. And many computer games are predictable. You know what's going to happen. Oh, if this happens, then something else is going to happen. So there may be a boss that comes in that you have to fight. I don't know. I don't know all the fighting games, but it's predictable. And then if you die in the game, you can go again, and then you'll know exactly when the boss is going to come out. And in the game, people can, save the world, rescue the princess, whatever it is that you're doing, plant the crops, and be productive and feel good about something that they're doing, even if their day job is frustrating for them, or going to college is frustrating, being with other people who don't understand them. So I hope that family members and people that they live with don't think you're wasting your time on video games, but recognize a person needs to take care of themselves. And as long as they're not addicted 24/7, it doesn't interfere with their health. If they play
Yes,
video games instead of sleeping, eating, or going to work or school, but to
Everything in
use it
moderation.
as a tool, as what can be a very useful tool, and any tool can be misused. But I think it's important to recognize the positive side of things like video games and other solitary pursuits and hobbies that help people just get back together after being out in a stressful situation, whether it's school or work or going to the store, to be able to come back and just do something that feels good. And if it's like flapping their hands, who cares if somebody flaps their hands? That's not hurting anybody. In the schools, we used to try to teach kids not to do that. I mean, I wasn't in the classroom, I was the psychologist, but the teachers would try to teach kids, don't do that, have nice hands, which is, I'm sorry that they did that because this doesn't hurt anybody. And it can either express joy and delight. And why would we tell people not to be joyful and delighted? Or it can be a signal that I'm upset, something is wrong, and the stress is rising. Then it communicates. It's like, oh, what can we fix? What can we change so that you feel better? So that's the direction
Right.
I hope we go with those things is, let people do what helps them feel better or what communicates to them or what helps them regroup after a tough day.
Regulating and recalibration is a big thing. I'm a rocker.
Recalibrate.
I tend to find that when I get bored, I'll rock back and forth. And
Yeah. Why not?
um, I don't, I've had certain people say, oh, stop rocking. And I'm like, "Mm, thank you." And I mean,
But
sometimes
no, thank you.
there is a place and there's not a place to do that. And I guess I appreciate when people are trying to help. But we also, I think that's a very good point, is as long as it's not hurting someone else, we need to let people be people. And if it
Yeah.
helps to regulate, when I get bored, that's what I find, or if I get stressed, that's when I find I rock a lot. Um on my feet because I just don't want to stand there like a statue. It just drives me
Yeah.
crazy.
And I'll tell you, sometimes I'm in a chair that has a rock. Sometimes I rock a little bit too. I'm not autistic, but there's a feedback. And I would think there are very few instances where rocking is going to be a problem. I mean, if you were at a wedding and you were in the very front row and you were rocking like all the way head down to knees and back, and then hitting your head against the back of the pew, that would be distracting. But
Oh
you're
yeah,
not doing that. And if you
no,
needed to do that, you would probably go to the back row. And I
very
can't
true.
think of any other reason why people should tell you not to rock. You rock.
I rock.
You rock.
Okay. Let me, can we just divert into a slightly different category? Because once these individuals get into society, which I'm hoping that they're going to do it prior to going after getting a job so they know where the best place to be. Let's talk a little bit about the pursuit of the job hunt for a moment before they get independent, because that's going to mean a lot of where they're looking to become independent. And are you familiar with the term ableism,
Oh,
which
yes.
which is self-advocating for ourselves? There
Uh,
are some people that say that that's good and that's bad. What is your take on it?
well, the way I've heard the word ableist, and ableist is someone who is like, they don't see, it's like being a racist or a misogynist. So they're having a negative impact on disabled people being able to have their own lives. So I see that kind of ableism as a bad thing. An ableist is they just think, well, we don't really need ramps, people can just, you know, because I can walk on stairs, then why do we have all these ramps? They're just in the way, or that kind of thing of small-minded. But I think that we need to have uh, disability advocates need to have bigger voices, and I'm so glad you have a big voice and a broad scope of people who listen to you, because we need those disability advocates to let people know what's what, and to be able to say there is nothing wrong with being autistic.
Right.
It's a different kind of brain, and you mentioned the workforce, getting a job. Unfortunately, so many jobs, they put a lot of emphasis on the interview, and it's like that is just measuring how well they're doing in that social interaction with you where they're nervous, not can they do the job. And so they're giving jobs to people who are good at interviewing, not necessarily good at doing the job. So I would love to see more autistic people being able to skip the interview. And Temple
Mm.
Grandin never got a single job from an interview. It was always from her portfolio that showed her work, or from somebody else saying, just hire her. You won't be sorry, just hire her. She's really good at what she does. If she had to do an interview, I don't know, I think people would not be able to see her true value just based on, oh, she didn't make eye contact or something. And so many people have that wrong emphasis. I love when people can work from home. The pandemic taught us that that is possible. And once the worst of the threat was over and bosses started saying, come back into the office, um, autistic workers need to not do that. They've already proved that they can work from home, and it would be so stressful. Many people who maybe had been self-diagnosed or who didn't realize that they were autistic, they didn't know that the rest of the world is not masking like crazy, like I am. So why am I so exhausted? Am I just weak? No, it's just that neurotypical people never think about eye contact, never think about social conversations. We just wing everything. And so someone who is constantly thinking about eye contact, thinking about social, planning everything in their head, it's exhausting from what I hear. And many of them found that when the pandemic came and their friends and colleagues were going, oh, it's so terrible. I hate working from home. And they're going, this is so wonderful. I love working from home. And then they're online with the TikToks and the YouTubes and people that they, like they might follow the comedian Hannah Gadsby because she's so like them. And then realizing a lot of these people are autistic. And now they're saying they're autistic, but isn't that me? And that's when they seek, they need a diagnosis, partly because they need a piece of paper to take back to their work to say, let this person work from home.
Mm.
That's a reasonable accommodation, especially if they've already proved that they can be productive from home.
Oh
Um,
boy. Oh boy. Yeah. I've been off for a month now, and one of the things that scares me most about going back to work is the fan that I have to work under when I hand out a coffee out the window. And I look at it, and no one else in my Starbucks, I work for Starbucks, no one else in Starbucks is like, what's the big deal? I'm
yeah,
like,
don't get it.
it's, or why I don't like it when anyone touches my computer. And they're like, what's the big deal? It's like, this is my work
Yeah.
bubble. This is
Yes.
my
Stay out of
work
my
bubble. And
bubble.
I want to create a work bubble that feels comfortable to me. Well, if you can't work there with the fan, go up front. I'm like, up front is noisy.
Yeah.
I just want to work up front. I like to work in the window, but why do I need the fan in the middle of the winter? So, I mean, that's when people start to take over for me. And I'm like, no, that's micromanaging. They're
Mhm.
just like, we don't understand. What do you want? I'm like, I'd like to do my job without a fan and be the best perky person I can be. But there are just some accommodations that I need that I just need you to understand without
Yeah.
trying to do my job for me. And that's what brought it up. Let's go on to the next
Yeah.
question.
Well, could I just say something about the fan?
Of
I,
course you
I have
can.
a couple things. And of course, here I am, the non-autistic person trying to fix something. But I guess my first question is there a law that says you have to have a fan to keep flies from coming into a place that serves food? Do they legally have to have it on? And if they legally have to, could you have ear defenders?
But then
Um,
I can't hear the customers.
uh, it's tricky.
It is tricky. It's a very
Yeah.
tricky situation. So I'm starting to evaluate whether or not I belong there anymore. I've been there for 4.5 years now, but as I've gotten older, and this is an important thing for a lot of autistic people to understand, is we don't have the same traits as we did 5 years ago. We don't have the same traits that we had 10 years ago. As
Oh,
we
yeah.
get older, there are different triggers that are going to affect us differently. I started in Starbucks in 2019, and
Uh-huh.
some of these issues weren't a factor to me then, but they
Mhm.
are to me now. And so people will look at me and say, well, that didn't bother you then. I'm like, that doesn't make a difference. That,
Yeah.
that, that, that doesn't mean that I should have to deal with the same conditions I had 5 years ago. And I think that we need to help managers understand that we have changing needs as we get older. Yeah, things
Yes.
get louder for me, and I don't like to be where there's chaos. And so, I mean, I'll gracefully eventually bow out and say this is just not the place for me anymore. But it's just sad that people base your initial interview on, okay, this is what you can deal with. And it's like, not quite.
Yeah.
Anyway, I
And
don't
there's
want to get into that kind of thing right now,
okay.
only because of
Okay.
the fact that this isn't about me. This is about
Okay.
understanding that I think the bosses have to understand that that was yesterday. This is today. This is what my needs are today.
Yeah, there are fluctuating needs that are affected by sensory and social events and conditions that can affect the person's ability to do their job on a day-to-day basis, minute to minute. Something happens that changes everything.
I used to be able to work 8 hours. I'm down to four comfortable. And it's
Yeah.
just the way it is. And it's just like, I've come to understand that that's just where my interest is. Let's go on
Now,
to the next one because I think it has a lot
yeah.
to do with it. Safe
Okay.
emotional masking. Now, I have always been the type of person who believed you should not mask just to blend in. However, I use what I call an emotional mask, which means that I know who I can count on in my work structure and who I can't count on. And I find that if I put on an emotional mask, what that does is that allows me to breathe and regulate my emotions so that I can get through the day without a meltdown. And a lot of people are like, well, that's still masking. It's like, I don't think it's masking because I'm not trying to pretend I'm you. I'm just trying to help myself keep my emotions in check so that I'm not going to go through burnout faster or have a meltdown faster because you're trying to do my job for me. What do you think?
I think it's really up to each person to decide for them what is masking and what is just emotional regulation um, for the condition, and that people should respect the person who says it about themselves, knows themselves more than I can as an outside person. I also have known a lot of autistic women who didn't realize that they were masking. They might have started masking day one of kindergarten. They showed up and here's all these children, and they all seem to know how to play with each other. And I have no idea, how is this happening? I'd better observe, I'd better imitate, I'd better watch everyone and try to fit in because I am like a little Martian and I need to learn how the playground works. And they might just assume everyone does this. And it may be into adulthood before they even realize, oh, I've been masking. What
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing is masking. Yeah, people might not realize that that's what they've been doing because they've been doing it as a survival strategy for so long. And sometimes the people in their lives think, oh, ever since you got your diagnosis, now you're pretending to be autistic. You're acting all autistic. It's like, well, maybe they just trust you enough to stop masking around you. They're not putting it on because they saw it on TV, on YouTube or TikTok. They are being themselves. And if themselves needs to move their bodies in a certain way or needs to not look at you when they're talking, whatever it is, let them be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's how to be a good friend and family member, I think, is to let the person be themselves.
Oh, that brings up a very important part. Family members who think that they know us. And all of a sudden, we're saying, I understand why I behave this way. I'm on the spectrum. You haven't been on the spectrum all your life. Well, you haven't been me all my life either. And
Yeah.
therefore, when I may not have communicated all of my challenges, that doesn't mean that I'm not autistic, or that doesn't mean I'm all of a sudden autistic, which is what I like to say sometimes is family members are like, oh, all of a sudden you're autistic. It's like, no, it's just I've become more comfortable with who I am now to
Yes.
voice it and say to you, these are my challenges because I'm finding that this is my issue. And we're hoping that families who are listening to this will look at their grown adult woman or man and
Mhm.
say, that explains a lot of things. And that little statement that explains a lot of things is enough for you to validate the person's new experiences in life. You don't have to agree, you don't have to disagree. Just that simple, oh, that explains a lot. And then we can say thank you for noticing, because now you're validating that I'm having good days and bad days based on different stimuli. And maybe that would go one step further to say, oh, I notice that you get a little bit more stressed when the music is louder or when there are a lot of people in the room. Is that a problem? I mean, the more families can notice about their all of a sudden autistic individual, I
Yes.
don't like to say that, but that's what it seems like sometimes. The more you can notice, the more we're going to feel welcomed in our family.
That is so important. And, I've met a lot of people whose parents have many different responses. For some, the parents say, well, that was me when I was your age. That's just normal. When the truth is, it is a genetic, it is genetic in many families, maybe not all families, but maybe the parents were also autistic, and to them that was, normal. I can't even say normal without the finger quotes. And so they will not accept that their child is. For some, I think moms in particular feel like if that's true, then I was a terrible mother for not recognizing it. So I can't accept it because I was a good mother. But the truth is, for adults now, when they were children, if they were little girls, it's unless they were just severely all of their autistic characteristics showing obviously with no masking, they would not have been identified in childhood. Parents, doctors, teachers would not have looked at these little girls and said, oh, I wonder if you're autistic. Because back then, that was not a thing that anybody thought of. They thought that there were very few autistic people. When I started teaching, it was like 1 in 10,000. And they would
Yeah.
think it's almost all boys, and it's boys who can't talk and who flap their hands and who clutch their toy trains because they love, the tank engines. Um, and that is what autism looks like. But it is such a broad spectrum. But
Oh, it
because,
is.
yes, and another misconception is way back in the early DSM, now we're in the DSM-5, but in the early days, the diagnosis of autism had to include what they used to call mental retardation, and we now call intellectual disability. Well, at some point, they figured out there are smart people who have all the other characteristics of autism, and they changed that. But for so many, that idea is stuck in their brain because that was when they first heard about autism. So they think, oh, you're too smart. You
Yeah.
couldn't be autistic because you're too smart. And that's just not the case anymore. But the people who don't, study the DSM, who are just people, they don't know that. And I hope we're all learning. And people like you and your reach to spread the word, I think is so important to get that word out there of what autism really looks like in adults and in women in particular, because it does look different.
It really does. I mean, it's interesting. I often get um I had to take a deep breath, let's just say, when people was like, "Oh yeah, I know what autism is. I worked with a 5-year-old boy before." Um, yeah, honey.
Different.
Autism in a 5-year-old boy is not autism in a 50-year-old woman. It's not the same. You have to ask questions of, okay, what are your challenges? And for me, my biggest one is auditory sensory. Is everything sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher to me sometimes if you're not speaking up and speaking out. I mean, a lot of people are like, "You're so loud." I'm like, "No, I need to hear that I am using words that are clear enough that you can hear me correctly."
Mhm.
And that may mean that I'm speaking a little bit louder than most people. And yes, it may mean that I have trouble whispering because I can't hear myself talk. But at the same time, it's like, it's all sensory issues is what got me like, oh,
Yes.
well, that's why I'm challenged. But I was reading from 4 years old on, so I knew that I was the type of kid that would fly under the radar because I was happy sitting in the corner reading book after book after book after book, and the teachers loved me
Yes.
because I was never a behavioral issue. But the downside of that is I never got the resources I need either because I was always a good student. I know our time is getting a little close. I'd like to kind of get through some of these other questions, if possible. We already talked about the Aspie individuals having the portfolio. I love that idea because I've gone through so many jobs myself because I could not speak correctly. And while my energy was high, I was just not as good as the neurotypical individual. And that hurts a lot, a lot. And I also was the first one out if there was a problem. Patience or persistence. This is a big one for me because I never knew when to follow up and when I was being a pain in the neck.
Hmm. That is a good one. Patience or persistence. Um, and I wish that there were a set answer of, you know, be patient for this long and then be persistent for this many times. But it's one of those things that requires insight into what the other person's reaction is. And for many autistic people, they have trouble reading the very subtle facial expressions and tones, some of those nonverbal things that are just micro expressions. That is the person letting you know that was too much. You need to stop now. And they're not getting that message. And it's more helpful if people will just tell you, tell me, I don't want to hear about that anymore. That I've heard that story 3 times, or tell me, you can't keep complaining about the same thing, or whatever it is. I don't know. But if people would come right out and say that, if that could be part of your job on the job training of letting them know what your needs are, is like, I need people to tell me. Don't assume that I will figure out that I'm being annoying. I've never known a single autistic person that wanted to be annoying, but sometimes other people call them annoying. Um, and it would be so easy to just communicate with words, not with subtle hints and raising an eyebrow and rolling the eyes and looking away.
Yeah.
It might not communicate unless they're very obvious. And most people are not. They want to be very subtle, but they think anybody would get that I'm bored, or anybody would get that I don't want to talk about that. But that's just not true. The subtle micro expressions that the majority person thinks, well, I told them, I let them know how I felt about it, do not translate into understanding. And the autistic people would understand if you just tell them. It's a communication issue. You've probably heard about the study in communication where they had a bunch of neuromajority people, and they had them communicate and tested it to see how, and they communicated very well. They took a bunch of autistic people and did the same study, the same, questions, and they also communicated just as well. Then they put the two groups together, some neuromajority, some neurodivergent, and there were a lot of communication problems. Can
Mhm.
you guess who got blamed for it? Who was the assumption that they're not good communicators? The autistic people who did
Yes,
fine on their own. But
ex-
that's just the ableism of, if there's a problem and I'm in the majority, then it must be you. It must be somebody else.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let me look at one other topic. And I think I'm going to have to bring you back when we go to do our relationships because I know you have a lot on
You
autistic
know, I was
relationships.
married to an autistic man, so I love to talk about that.
That's great. I think we're going to have another
Oh,
session together. You and I, we have had so much fun.
it's so
Um,
much fun. I'd love to. Yes.
Wonderful. My next question is, do you think that it would be okay that we go into interviews and we say to them, I need reassurance, regular reassurance, and I need regular explanations if you all of a sudden change my job on me. Do you think we're asking too much if we say that we need regular reassurance and regular explanations for shifts in job? Because I often find that a lot of people are like, well, you should just know. You should just know, or you should just accept. And I find that I thrive better when all of a sudden I'm changed jobs and I'm giving an explanation why they've changed my job. Or if they abruptly change me and I need the reassurance that I didn't do anything wrong. What do you think on that topic? And we'll wrap it up
I,
after that one.
yeah, I think that's a very important thing. I think we need to be aware that if you go into an interview and they haven't hired you and you say, I need reassurance, what they're going to think is, she's going to take a lot of attention and we just don't want to deal with it. So they probably just wouldn't hire that person. If you go in and say, I do my best work when there is clear communication and I know if I'm on the right track or the wrong track. And if you tell me when I'm doing it right, or if my supervisor tells me when I'm doing it right, I will keep doing it right. And if they tell me there's something wrong, I will change and I will learn. Um, and that's how I do my best work, is when I know what to expect. Coming from the position of, or how I do my best work, and that I will do what you need as long as I know what you need, I think we'll do better in the interview than I need reassurance, rather than making it what I need, more how I can help you. I can be an excellent worker if you just tell me exactly what you need. I'm going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my two
That's a
cents on
great
that.
way to do it. Oh, checklists are very important to the Aspie individual. We kind of think of it as a game, sort of, oh, you need this, 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 and this, and done. Okay. And you know what? The funny thing is that I want to bring up one quick thing before we wrap this all up and say that, I want to think of how you said it before so that I can, when I'm going through something and I can get a project done. This may not be because I can't bring it up in my head right now. I like to know that if you give me a chance to prove myself on a job, instead of going through the interview process, give me a trial run. Give me 5 different activities to accomplish and watch how strong I am at minding my business. I'm not fooling around. I go in, I'm loyal. And we were talking about this last week too, is I tend to find that a checklist is a lot of fun. And it
Yeah.
gets us to show the worker that we are committed to our jobs versus being the person who's going to get up and go to the water cooler, go to the bathroom, hang out with the friends, and do this and that. And the other thing, I tend to find that we would get a lot more jobs if we could have a trial run. Do you think that would work?
I think if there was like a small family-owned business and you could just talk to them, they would have the ability to do that. If you go to a big, huge corporation, like, Starbucks, um, they probably wouldn't do it because they have ways that they do it. You have to interview. Not that you couldn't talk to Starbucks if you're working for them and say, You know, I may need to do you have like an office job in the Starbucks building that's not under the fan with the people? Um, but if you want to work for a small company, maybe family owned, where you can talk to a human being about it and say, let me work for you for free for however many days, you'll find that I don't socialize and chit chat. I get the job done. If you tell me what you want, I will do what you want. And, I will give you my best work every day. Um, and then they might say, sure, let's give it a try because they have the ability. The way a big company, a huge corporation does not have that leeway. You can't talk to somebody in hiring and say, can we do this? They'd say, no. But a
Yeah,
small company, they're out there. There's a lot of, mom and pop places, family operated places where they might be able to be relaxed about it and to give people a chance. And people, if you give someone a chance, they can prove themselves and they can show what they can do.
absolutely. Oh, Wendy, this has been such a wonderful interview today. I really appreciate you taking the time to come
I have
today
enjoyed
and
it.
help us out and help the women feel like it's not a scary world on the other side of the bridge. They really can do it. Can they make a snap decision? Probably not the best idea to make quick decisions. You really have to sit down and think about, and maybe even take a tour of different places in society and say, see how you feel. I know for me, sometimes I can just drive over a bridge and it feels a little not quite right to me. But by Wendy being here today and helping me to go through and really help people analyze and okay, we need to make some strong decisions on what works for us before we move. We're not the people who can jump in and then figure it out. We need to make a little bit more planning, and but we can be just as successful when we do that. And I hope
Absolutely.
we'll take that chance, right, Wendy?
Right. The bridge is open and they've got you, Suzanne, to help. You've been over there and back, and you can help guide them along the way. Thanks for the work you do.
Well, thank you very much. Next week on the Aspie Bridge, we're going to be talking about the work health balance. How much of a workday should you expect to do before you run into challenges of burnout or meltdown? Because that work health balance is so important. You don't want to be going into a 9 hour day if you really are best for 4 hours at a time. So, we're going to be talking about some ways to make that work health a lot easier for you women so that when you go in and look for a job, you know not to get the 10-hour on your feet kind of position because there is a position out there for you that's just right. Wendy, thank you so much for coming today. And
Well,
I would
thank
love
you,
to have
Susie.
you back for relationships.
I'd love that. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, that wraps it up on the Aspie Bridge. Thank you so much for coming today. And I hope you'll stay tuned and subscribe so that you can get more opportunities to hear what we have to talk about on the Aspie Bridge.